The Infinite Simulator, a one-piece progression story. Phase 1, capitalizing on the base and East Blue optimization. Chapter 1, Arrival. Ashura opened his eyes to the sound of crashing waves. The sky above him was an endless blue, gulls circling lazily overhead, their cries swallowed almost immediately by the steady rhythm of water moving against wood and stone. The air smelled of salt and fish and tar, and something else underneath it all, the specific, living smell of a place that worked for a living rather than performed for visitors. His body ached, not the ache of sleeping badly or working hard. Something deeper and stranger than that, a total body disorientation, like every cell had been taken apart and reassembled by someone working from a description rather than memory, and the cells themselves were still deciding whether the result was correct. He lay still. Think before you move, think before you do anything. Slowly, he pushed himself up onto his elbows and took in his surroundings. A harbor, a modest island town climbing a gentle hill above the waterfront, its buildings practical and slightly weathered, the architecture of a place that had grown rather than been designed. Fishing boats on the eastern side, merchant vessels in the middle, and on the western side of the harbor, tied to a dock that was maintained to a slightly higher standard than the others, a compact vessel flying a flag he recognized before his mind had consciously processed what his eyes were seeing. White-blue, a fist and a seagull. Marines. The recognition arrived in two separate layers. The first layer was intellectual, the part of him that had spent years absorbing this world through screens and forums and late-night wiki spirals. That part recognized the flag the way you recognized a logo, pattern matching, familiar, almost comfortable. The second layer was the body, and the body understood something the intellectual part had always known in the abstract but had never actually felt, that Marines in this world were not fictional characters. They were human beings, with weapons, with authority, with the institutional weight of a global government behind every decision they made. And he was currently sitting on their dock looking like a vagrant who had appeared from nowhere, which was accurately exactly what he was. He stood carefully, kept his head at a neutral angle, let his body find the posture of someone who had somewhere unimportant to be and was heading there without urgency. He stepped off the dock and into the street that ran along the harbor front, keeping his pace easy and his eyes forward. Don't run. Running is a signal. Walk. Look tired. Look like you belong to the background. He was already 2 streets away from the dock before the full weight of it hit him. He stopped in the shadow of a building and stood very still for a moment. This is real. Not a dream. Dreams didn't have this texture, the specific resistance of cobblestones through the soles of his shoes, the smell of someone frying something with onions coming from a window above him, the sound of a child arguing with another child 3 streets over about something that mattered enormously to both of them. Dreams were impressionistic. This was specific. This was a real place that existed independently of whether he was experiencing it or not. He was in the one-piece world. He checked his pockets with hands he kept deliberately steady. Coins he didn't recognize, he counted them carefully without taking them fully out of his pocket. 340 berry, which he knew was enough for approximately 1 night at a cheap inn and 2 modest meals and very little else. A plain dark jacket, folded, nothing else. He put everything back and kept walking. All right, start from the beginning. What do I actually know? He knew the broad shape of this world. The geography, 4 blues, the Grand Line, the Calm Belt, the Red Line. The power structure, world government, Marines, Shichibukai, Yonko. The specific monsters who existed in it and approximately where they were and what they were doing. He knew the story the way someone who had read it and watched it and thought about it for years knew a story. What he did not know was where exactly he was. What island? What year? What was happening here specifically? And more urgently, how to survive the next week on 340 berry. One problem at a time. Then, ding. The sound arrived inside his skull, not through his ears, inside in the specific place where thought happened, with a clarity that had nothing to do with volume. Clean, sourceless, like the concept of a sound rather than the sound itself. He kept walking. He did not react visibly. A voice followed the sound. Flat, mechanical, completely without warmth or effect, the voice of something that processed rather than felt. Hello, host. I am the Infinite Simulator System. My function is to simulate all possibilities, all worlds, lives, techniques, battles, destinies, discoveries, and experiences. After every simulation ends, the host retains in full every skill and technique mastered within the simulation, every piece of knowledge and understanding gained, the complete physical integration of all conditioning and development, all life experience accumulated across the simulation's duration. Upon simulation end, negative side effects are automatically removed before transfer. Discarded, post-traumatic stress, psychological trauma, grief accumulation, emotional instability, mental corruption, addiction responses, and all other psychologically degrading effects. The host returns carrying only what is beneficial. Nothing harmful survives the transfer. He turned another corner, found a narrow side street with no foot traffic, and walked to its end, where a low wall looked out over a patch of scrubland sloping toward the water. He sat on the wall and looked at the water and listened. Current world, One Piece. Current timeline, 12 years before the events of canon. Current location, East Blue, Rind Island. System parameters. Simulation cost, 0. Cooldown between simulations, 10 seconds of real-world time. During simulation, real-world time stops completely. The host exists only within the simulation until it ends. Simulation end condition. Death of the host within the simulation. Upon simulation end, real-world time resumes. The 10-second cooldown begins. All retained rewards integrate immediately. Simulation duration, unlimited. The host may live an entire lifetime within a simulation. Real-world time does not pass. The system is a pure sandbox, no automated objectives, no assigned goals. The host defines every parameter. Ready when the host chooses. Ashura sat on the wall for a long time after the voice finished. The water moved below him. The smell of the onions from somewhere above had been replaced by the smell of bread. A cat appeared at the far end of the side street, looked at him with the flat, evaluating stare of a cat deciding whether he was interesting, decided he wasn't, and disappeared. He thought carefully. Real-world time stops during a simulation. He tested the logic of this. If time stopped in reality while he was inside a simulation, then a simulation that lasted 50 years cost him nothing in real-world time except the 10-second cooldown after it ended. He could run a simulation from this wall right now, live an entire life inside it, die of old age, and open his eyes on the same wall with the same afternoon light, and the same cat possibly reappearing around the same corner 10 seconds later. Everything he learned in that lifetime would be in him when he returned. He could do it again, and again. Every 10 seconds of sitting on this wall could buy him another lifetime. The scale of that was so large it was almost meaningless to contemplate directly. So he didn't. He pulled it down to the immediate question, what do I actually need right now? Not power, not haki, not combat ability. He needed to understand where he was. He was on an island he had never heard of, in a world he knew the shape of but not the texture, with 340 berry and no identity, and no history and no connections. Before he could build anything, he needed to understand the ground he was building on. The people. The culture, the rhythms and hierarchies and unspoken rules of this specific place. He needed to know Rind Island the way someone who had lived here for years knew it. And there was a marine outpost 2 streets from the harbor that he needed to understand from the inside. Not yet, not directly. First the island, first the ground. He stood up from the wall, put his hands in his jacket pockets, and walked back toward the harbor district. Start from nothing, learn everything, rush nothing. This is where it begins. Chapter 2, The First Mapping. Ashura didn't find a hiding spot right away. He spent his remaining 340 berry on a loaf of hard, dense bread and a small clay jar of water from a street vendor whose face was lined with saltware. He didn't ask questions. Questions left impressions. Instead, he watched where people walked, which alleys were used as thoroughfares, and which ones were left to the shadows. By twilight, he found what he was looking for. A narrow, dead-end gap between an abandoned timber warehouse and the high stone retaining wall of the upper town. It was damp, smelled of rotting cedar, and was completely invisible from the main road. He sat down, his back against the rough stone. System, he thought, initiate simulation. Set parameters, spawn me at the harbor docks at dawn tomorrow. Objective, gathering baseline intelligence on Rind Island. Parameters accepted. Beginning Simulation 1. The transition wasn't a flash of light, it was simply a shift in the air. Suddenly, the smell of damp cedar vanished. The twilight darkness shattered into the crisp, biting chill of an east-blue dawn. Ashura opened his eyes. He was standing on the very same dock where he had arrived hours ago, but the sun was just breaching the horizon, painting the water in brilliant streaks of orange and gold. He looked down at his hands. They were the same hands. He checked his pockets, 340 berry. "Hey, you there?" Ashura turned. A stocky man in a stained leather apron was hauling a crate of ice toward a fishmonger's stall. "Don't just stand there blocking the path," the man grunted, tossing a copper coin at Ashura's feet. "Carry this to the third stall and I'll give you 2 more. Ashura didn't hesitate. He picked up the coin, lifted the heavy crate, and began his first day of a life that didn't exist. For the next 5 years inside the simulation, Ashura became a ghost of Rind Island. He didn't seek power. He didn't try to learn how to fight. He worked. He became a dock worker, then a delivery boy for the local taverns, then a clerk for a minor merchant who traded with neighboring islands. He mapped every street, every sewer line, every hidden cove on the island's rocky perimeter. He learned the names of the 3 prominent merchant families who controlled the local economy. He learned that the Marine base on the western side of the harbor was designated as the 77th Branch Outpost, commanded by a captain named Corazon, not the Don Quixote brother, just a common officer with a common name. A man who wore a vest, was strict, but ultimately lazy. He lived until he was 28 inside that simulation. He died quietly, caught in a sudden violent winter fever that swept through the lower town's tenements. As his lungs filled with fluid and his vision faded to black in a small, rented room, he felt a strange sense of detachment. End of Loop 1, he thought and let go. Chapter 3, 10 seconds. Ashura's eyes snapped open. He was sitting in the damp gap between the abandoned timber warehouse and the stone retaining wall. The twilight was exactly as he had left it, the same deep orange bleeding into purple along the western horizon, the same single lantern being lit on a distant fishing boat. The spider he had watched earlier had moved 3 inches down the beam. The cat was gone. Simulation 1 concluded. Duration, 5 years, 4 months, 12 days. Cause of death, illness, pneumonia. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. A massive wave of information crashed into his brain, but it didn't hurt. It was like a perfectly indexed library suddenly expanding inside his head. He knew exactly which cobblestones on the main street were loose. He knew that the merchant house of the Garrow family smuggled untaxed spice through the northern cove on the 3rd night of every lunar cycle. He knew the names, faces, and drinking habits of every bartender on the waterfront. He looked down at his hands. Physically, his body hadn't changed yet. He hadn't trained it to do anything remarkable, but his mind was decades sharper. His perception of the environment was entirely transformed. He was no longer a stranger in a strange world. He was a local. 1, 2, 3. He counted the real-world seconds in his head. The system had a 10-second cooldown. He watched the spider slowly crawl further down the wooden beam near his knee. 7, 8, 9, 10. The phantom chime resonated in his mind again. The system was ready. Ashura leaned his head back against the wall. Now that he knew the island, he needed the shield. In this world, the law was a weapon, and the strongest weapon on Rind Island belonged to the world government. It was time to enter the wolf's den. System, Ashura commanded. Initiate Simulation 2. Parameter, join the Marine 77th Branch Outpost as a recruit at the earliest opportunity. Focus, physical conditioning, marine martial arts, and internal structural knowledge. Parameters accepted, beginning Simulation 2. Chapter 4, The Chore Boy. The cold dawn of the simulation hit him again. Ashura didn't waste time working the docks this time. With his perfect knowledge of the island's layout and schedules, he walked straight to the gates of the Marine 77th Branch Outpost before the morning bells had even finished ringing. The guard at the gate, a bored-looking seaman named Largo, lowered his spear. "State your business, kid." "I want to enlist," Ashura said, his voice steady, devoid of the hesitation a true civilian would have. "I have no family, no home, and I want to serve justice." Largo blinked, surprised by the bluntness, then snorted. Another brat looking for 3 square meals? Wait here. An hour later, Ashura was handed a coarse gray uniform, a wooden scrub brush, and a bucket of lye. He wasn't given a rifle or a sword. He was given a section of the courtyard to clean. He became a chore boy. For the first 2 years of the simulation, Ashura's life was defined by the scent of bleach and the texture of calloused skin. He scrubbed the decks of the patrol cutters, cleaned the officers' latrines, and hauled 100-pound sacks of flour into the mess hall. But he didn't just work blindly. Every time he scrubbed near the training grounds, his eyes were locked on the recruits. He watched the way the instructors demonstrated the standard Marine sword forms. He listened to the rhythm of their breathing during long-distance runs. At night, while the rest of the chore boys slept in their cramped barracks, Ashura slipped out into the moonlit courtyard. Using the exact form he had memorized during the day, he began to train. Push-ups until his chest burned. Squats until his legs shook. He practiced the basic thrusts and parries with a broken broomstick, repeating the motions hundreds, thousands of times until the clumsy movements of his untrained simulation body became fluid. He learned that the 77th branch was corrupt, but not cartoonishly so. Captain Corazon simply took bribes from the Garrow family to look the other way regarding their smuggling operations. The real danger was Lieutenant Commander Bogard, not the famous one under Garp, but a strict, unyielding martinet who hated slackers. By year 3, Ashura's physical progress could no longer be hidden behind a broom. During the annual recruit evaluation, he volunteered to fill a vacant slot in the sparring circle. He dismantled the lead recruit in 3 precise strikes. Chapter 5, Rising in the Ranks. Where did you learn that stance, chore boy? Lieutenant Commander Bogard's eyes were like flint as he looked down at Ashura, who was standing perfectly at attention in the center of the dirt ring. The recruit he had beaten was still groaning on the floor, clutching bruised ribs. By watching you, sir, Ashura replied, his tone perfectly respectful, completely devoid of arrogance. And by practicing every night after my duties were finished. Bogard stared at him for a long, tense minute. Then he turned to the master-at-arms. Get this man a proper uniform, he's no longer a chore boy. The next 4 years were a blur of violent progression. Ashura was officially inducted as a seaman recruit, and he treated the Marine base like a buffet of combat data. He participated in coastal patrols, fought off small-time pirate crews who dared to raid the local fishing boats, and studied the Marine tactical manuals until he could recite them from memory. By age 24, he was promoted to Chief Petty Officer. He had his own squad. He was given access to the base's restricted library, where he found older, dusty texts detailing the advanced combat styles used in the Grand Line. He didn't find any manuals on Haki. Rind Island was far too insignificant for that. But he did find notes on the Rokushiki 6 powers, specifically the foundational theory behind Saru, Shave, and Tekai, Iron Body. He realized his current physical strength wasn't enough to execute them safely. Attempting Saru without explosive leg power would simply tear his muscles apart. So, he redoubled his training. He wore iron weights under his uniform. He ran up the island's steep cliffs with boulders strapped to his back. He became the finest soldier the 77th branch had seen in a decade. But peace in the East Blue was always an illusion. In the 7th year of his simulation, the horizon darkened. A shadow fell over Rind Island that the local Marines were entirely unprepared to handle. Chapter 6, The Iron Wall of the 77th. The pirate ship didn't fly a flag Ashura recognized from the original story, meaning they were either a short-lived crew or one that never made it to the grand stage. But to Rind Island, they were gods of destruction. The Blood Anchor pirates, led by a massive man named Captain Krieger, a brute with a bounty of 8 million berry who wielded a massive, spiked flail. Sir, the harbor defenses have collapsed, a bloody scout screamed as he burst into the command room. The Garrow family opened the northern gates. They betrayed us. Captain Corazon was pale, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his cigar. Evacuate? We need to evacuate to the upper town. No, Ashura said, stepping forward. He didn't look at Corazon, he looked at Bogard, who was already drawing his saber. If we retreat, the lower town burns. We hold the choke point at the harbor street. You're a chief petty officer, Ashura. You don't give orders, Corazon barked. Ashura didn't argue. He simply turned and walked out of the room. Behind him, 30 Marines followed. They didn't follow the captain. They followed the man who had trained alongside them in the mud for 7 years. The battle at the Harbor Street was a bloodbath. Ashura stood at the front of the line, a standard-issue Marine cutlass in his right hand. He was a whirlwind of practiced efficiency. Every strike was lethal, aimed at the throat, the eyes, the unarmored gaps in the pirate's leather gear. His 5 years of island mapping meant he knew exactly where to position his men to prevent being flanked. For 2 hours, the 30 Marines held against 100 pirates. Then Captain Krieger arrived. The massive pirate swung his spiked flail with terrifying force, shattering the stone barricade Ashura had built. Ashura dodged, the wind from the passing weapon tearing at his uniform. He lunged forward, driving his cutlass deep into Krieger's thigh. Krieger roared in pain, but his sheer physical durability was monstrous compared to Ashura's still-developing body. With a backhand strike, Krieger smashed his iron-plated fist into Ashura's chest. Ribs shattered. Ashura flew backward, crashing into the wall of a building. He spat out a torrent of dark blood, his vision blurring instantly. Through the haze, he saw Krieger raising the flail for a finishing blow. Ashura didn't feel fear. He didn't feel despair. He simply observed the trajectory of the weapon, noting the slight blind spot in Krieger's left shoulder caused by the leg wound he had just inflicted. 14 years in this loop, Ashura thought as the iron spikes descended. Data collected. The flail crushed down, darkness. Chapter 7, The Master Recruits. Ashura's chest heaved as his eyes snapped open in the twilight of the narrow alley. He instinctively clutched his sternum, expecting the agonizing pain of shattered bones and iron spikes. There was nothing. His skin was whole. His lungs expanded fully, drawing in the damp, cedar-scented air of Rind Island without a trace of fluid or blood. Simulation 2 concluded. Duration, 14 years, 2 months, 1 day. Cause of death, combat trauma, crushed chest. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. Then came the physical integration. It wasn't a mental data dump this time. It was a profound, systemic restructuring of his physical form. Ashura gripped the edges of his dark jacket as his muscles suddenly coiled and tightened. The thin, slightly malnourished frame of a dimensional traveler transformed over the course of 3 seconds into the hard, dense, perfectly conditioned body of a 14-year veteran Marine. His calluses returned, thick and tough on his palms. His core hardened into a wall of solid muscle. His nervous system rewired itself, embedding 14 years of swordsmanship, tactical reflexes, and high-intensity physical conditioning directly into his flesh. He stood up. He didn't feel heavy. He felt incredibly light. He balled his fist and punched the air. Whip! The strike was so fast it produced a sharp, audible crack that echoed in the narrow alley. He smiled. It was a cold, practiced expression. He had lived nearly 20 years across 2 simulations, yet when he checked the twilight sky outside the alley, the sun was still lingering at the exact same point on the horizon, deep orange, not yet violet. The spider had moved only 3 inches down the wooden beam. 10, 9, 8. He waited out the cooldown, feeling the immense power vibrating through his new limbs. He was no longer a vagrant. He was, physically and mentally, an elite soldier hidden in the skin of a teenager. But he knew it wasn't enough. 8 million Berry was the standard for a dangerous pirate in the East Blue, and Captain Krieger had killed him because of a gap in raw physical power and durability. He needed more. He needed to optimize the timeline. System, Ashura whispered into the dark. Initiate Simulation 3. Parameters, same as Loop 2, but utilize all current physical conditioning and tactical data to achieve maximum promotion speed and secure advanced training methods immediately. Parameters accepted, beginning Simulation 3. Chapter 8, The Speedrun. When the simulation reset, Ashura didn't wait for Largo to question him at the gate. He walked into the 77th branch outpost with the posture of a visiting inspector. When Largo lowered his spear, Ashura didn't speak. He simply disarmed the guard with a single, fluid sweep of his hand, catching the spear before it hit the ground and presenting it back to the stunned Marine. "Tell Lieutenant Commander Bogard that a man who knows how to fight has arrived," Ashura said. Within 3 months of the 3rd simulation, Ashura skipped the chore boy phase entirely. He was promoted straight to petty officer after demonstrating a level of swordsmanship that left the base's instructors looking like amateurs. By the end of the first year, he was a lieutenant junior grade, commanding his own patrol vessel. He used his position to systematically dismantle the pirate crews that fed into Captain Krieger's future fleet. He knew their names, their hiding spots, and their tactics before they even conceived them. But his primary focus remained his own body. With his advanced Marine rank, he demanded access to the high-grade nutrient rations reserved for headquarters officers. He spent 6 hours a day in the training room, his body screaming under the strain of his optimized regime. By year 5 of the third loop, he finally achieved the prerequisite physical density. He stood before a massive iron anvil in the base's forge. He took a deep breath, focusing the entirety of his physical momentum into his legs, stomping the ground with explosive violence 10 times in the span of a single heartbeat. Saru. His body vanished from sight, leaving a small crater in the dirt floor. He reappeared 10 feet away, his boots smoking slightly from the friction. He turned toward the anvil, crossed his arms, and tightened every muscle in his torso, forcing his spiritual focus into the cellular structure of his skin until it took on the rigid density of metal. Tekai. He signaled the base blacksmith, who swung a heavy iron sledgehammer directly into Ashura's chest. Clang! The sound of metal striking metal rang through the forge. The blacksmith staggered back, his arms vibrating from the impact. Ashura stood completely unmoved, a faint grin on his face. His skin didn't even bear a bruise. He had mastered 2 of the 6 powers. Chapter 9, Changing the Sandbox. By the 10th year of the third simulation, Ashura had completely altered the political landscape of Rind Island. He had secretly gathered evidence of Captain Corazon's corruption, used it to blackmail the captain into granting him complete tactical control of the branch, and then systematically executed the Garrow family for treason before they could ever contact the Blood Anchor pirates. He had turned the 77th branch into a fortress. "Sir, a pirate vessel has been spotted entering the northern waters," his adjutant reported. It was Largo, now a fiercely loyal sergeant under Ashura's command. "It's the Blood Anchor pirates." "I know," Ashura said, fastening his white Marine officer's coat over his shoulders. "Let them land." This time, there was no surprise attack. There was no betrayal. The Marines of the 77th branch were waiting on the docks in perfect defensive formations, armed with heavy repeating rifles and reinforced barricades. When Captain Krieger stepped off his ship, roaring his challenge and swinging his massive spiked flail, Ashura didn't wait for his men to engage. He stepped past the front line. "You're the one who caused me so much trouble in the last life," Ashura murmured. Krieger blinked. "What are you talking about, brat? Die." The flail came down with the same terrifying speed that had crushed Ashura's chest years ago. But to Ashura's current eyes that had spent a decade mastering advanced combat, the motion looked sluggish, predictable, and flawed. "Saru." Ashura vanished. The flail struck nothing but empty wood, shattering the dock planks. Before Krieger could recover, Ashura appeared directly in his blind spot, his cutlass coated in the sheer momentum of his high-speed movement. One strike. The blade flashed through the air, cutting clean through the chains of the flail and severing Krieger's right hand at the wrist. The massive pirate screamed, clutching his stump as blood sprayed across the deck. "Impossible. Who are you?" Krieger gasped, collapsing to his knees. "Just a Marine who had time to practice," Ashura said coldly. With a swift, merciless arc, he took the pirate's head. The remaining pirates surrendered within minutes. Ashura stood among the bodies, his uniform pristine, his breathing steady. He had conquered the threat that had killed him. He had mastered the island, mastered the base, and mastered his own current limitations. He lived another 8 years in that loop, eventually being offered a promotion to the Marine headquarters in Marineford. But as he boarded the ship to leave the East Blue, he realized that leaving Rind Island within the simulation would take him into uncharted territory where his knowledge of local events would no longer give him an absolute advantage. He needed to return to reality with what he had built. Standing on the deck of the moving battleship, he looked at his second-in-command, Largo. "Sir." Ashura drew his own flintlock pistol, pointed it directly under his chin, and smiled. See you in 10 seconds. Banged. Chapter 10, The Real Move. Ashura opened his eyes. The twilight was exactly as he had left it, the same deep orange bleeding into purple along the western horizon, the same single lantern being lit on a distant fishing boat. The spider had moved 3 inches down the beam. The cat was still gone. Simulation 3 concluded. Duration, 18 years, 6 months, 4 days. Cause of death, suicide. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. The final physical integration was immense. His height didn't change drastically, but his bone density, muscle fiber quality, and internal energy reserves exploded. His posture was perfect. His presence alone was heavy, carrying the invisible weight of a man who had commanded armies, executed warlords, and mastered the foundational martial arts of the world government. He reached into his pocket. His fingers brushed against the 340 berry he had carried since his arrival. In the real world, less than 20 minutes had passed since he first stepped off the dimensional dock. To any outside observer, he was just a teenage vagrant who had walked into an alley to rest. But mentally and physically, he was now a 28-year-old veteran commander who possessed perfect knowledge of Rind Island's secrets, 2 of the 6 powers, and a body capable of killing an 8 million berry pirate with a single strike. He walked out of the alley and stepped onto the cobblestones of the lower town. The lanterns were being lit along the harbor front, casting long, flickering yellow glows across the water. He did not go to the Marine base as a supplicant. He walked directly to the main gate. The guard, a young man he recognized from 2 lifetimes of service, though the guard did not recognize him, stepped forward. "Halt, state your business." Ashura looked past the guard toward the commanding officer's building. Captain Corazon's office. A light was on. "I have an appointment with Captain Corazon," Ashura said. The guard frowned. "There's no appointment listed." Ashura reached into his jacket and withdrew a single folded piece of paper. On it, written in the precise hand he had developed over decades of marine paperwork, was a list of dates, amounts, and cargo manifests. Every bribe Corazon had taken from the Garrow family. Every look the other way. "Give him this," Ashura said. "Tell him the man who wrote it is waiting at the harbor tavern. He has until the last lantern is lit to come speak with me. If he doesn't come alone, the next copy goes to Marine headquarters." The guard took the paper, his face pale. Ashura turned and walked away. He did not look back. The harbor tavern was called the Salty Bilge. Ashura had cleaned its floors in Simulation 1, delivered its ale in Simulation 2, and commanded its loyalty in Simulation 3. He sat at a corner table facing the door, ordered nothing, and waited. The last lantern on the harbor front was still flickering when Captain Corazon walked in alone. He was a heavy-set man in his 40s, his uniform slightly too tight, his face carrying the permanent flush of a man who drank more than he should. He sat down across from Ashura without being invited. "Who are you?" Corazon asked. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "I'm the person who knows everything," Ashura said. "Every bribe, every shipment you allowed through, every blind eye you turned. I have evidence enough to have you court-martialed and executed within the month." Corazon's face went white. "What do you want?" "Control," Ashura said. "You will remain captain in name, you will draw your salary, you will enjoy your comforts, but every operational decision of the 77th branch will be mine. You will sign what I tell you to sign. You will approve what I tell you to approve. In return, your secrets stay buried." "And if I refuse?" Ashura leaned forward. The candle between them flickered. "Then I walk out that door, and by morning, Vice Admiral Garp himself will receive a very interesting package. Do you think he would be merciful to a corrupt officer who let pirates burn a town because he was on someone's payroll?" Corazon stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound. "You're 15 years old." "I'm older than you," Ashura said, and it was true. "Do we have an understanding?" Corazon reached for the tavern's cheap rum, poured himself a glass with trembling hands, and drank it in one swallow. "Yes," he said, "we have an understanding." Ashura stood up. "Good. Tomorrow morning I will be at the base. You will introduce me as your new tactical advisor. You will tell no one about this conversation." He walked out of the tavern. The harbor front was quiet now, the last merchants closing their stalls, the night settling in fully. Phase 1 was complete. Chapter 11, Real-World Domination. The next morning, Ashura walked through the gates of the 77th branch as if he owned them. Captain Corazon, pale and hungover, introduced him to the assembled officers as Mr. Ashura, my new tactical advisor from headquarters. There was no record of such a position, but no one questioned it. The captain's word was law, and the captain looked like a man who had seen a ghost. Lieutenant Commander Bogard was the only one who seemed suspicious. His eyes tracked Ashura throughout the morning briefing, measuring him. After the briefing, Bogard cornered Ashura in the corridor. "I've served in this branch for 20 years, Bogard said. "I know every officer who comes through here. You're not from headquarters." "No," Ashura agreed, "I'm not." "Then who are you?" Ashura looked at him. Bogard was a good man, strict but fair. He had trained Ashura in 2 different simulations. He had never taken a bribe. He had fought beside his men in the harbor battle and had survived only because Krieger's attention had been on Ashura. "I'm the man who's going to turn this branch into something actually worth respecting," Ashura said. "You can help me or you can stay out of my way, but if you try to stop me, I will destroy you. Not because I want to, because I can't afford not to." Bogard stared at him for a long moment, then slowly he nodded. "I'll watch you," he said, "and if you betray this branch, I'll kill you myself." "Fair enough." Over the next week, Ashura consolidated his control. He reviewed the branch's financial records and identified every officer on Corazon's payroll. He summoned them one by one to private meetings, presented them with evidence of their corruption, and offered them a choice: resign quietly or face court-martial. 7 officers resigned. The remaining 3, including Largo, who Ashura knew from his simulations to be fundamentally loyal but poorly led, were offered a different choice: stay and serve the branch as it should be served, or leave with a full pension. All 3 stayed. By the end of the first month, the 77th branch was entirely under Ashura's control. Captain Corazon signed whatever was put in front of him. Lieutenant Commander Bogard ran the day-to-day operations with quiet efficiency, and Ashura sat in a small office in the back of the base, planning. Chapter 12, the first real resource harvest. With the 77th branch under his control, Ashura had access to resources that would have taken him years to acquire otherwise. The branch's treasury was modest by Grand Line standards, but in the East Blue, it was substantial. Ashura requisitioned 100,000 Berry, a fraction of the branch's discretionary funds, and used it to begin building his real-world infrastructure. First, he purchased a ship. Not a marine vessel. That would be too conspicuous. Instead, he used his knowledge of the local merchant networks to acquire a high-speed cutter from a shipwright in the neighboring island of Ludes. The ship was small, nimble, and designed for smuggling, which meant it was fast, had hidden compartments, and could be crewed by as few as 2 people. Second, he purchased weapons. The East Blue was full of retired Marines, disgraced soldiers, and men who had once held a sword but now held a drink. Ashura found them. He offered them honest work and decent pay, and within a month he had a 20-man security force trained to his exacting standards. Not pirates, not Marines, something new. Third, he established logistics. The 77th branch's supply lines ran through a network of warehouses and depots across the northern East Blue. Ashura mapped them all, identified the weak points, and quietly began diverting a small percentage of every shipment to his own storage facility, a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Rind Island that he had purchased through a shell company. By the end of the second month, Ashura had everything he needed to operate independently. He stood on the deck of his new ship, the Grey Ghost, watching the sun rise over the harbor. Largo, who had resigned from the Marines to join Ashura's private force, stood beside him. "Where to, boss?" Largo asked. Ashura looked east, toward the Grand Line. "Not yet," he said. "We're not ready. First, we need to understand what we're walking into." He turned and walked below deck to his private cabin. He sat down on the narrow cot, closed his eyes, and reached for the system. System, initiate simulation 4. Parameters, Grand Line, a route that takes me through the underworld of the world government. I need the secrets of the 6 powers that the East Blue Marines don't have. JEPO, Rankiaku, and anything else I can steal. Parameters accepted, beginning simulation 4. Phase 2, mastering the 6 powers and grand line preparation. Chapter 13, Loop 4, the Cypher-Paul route. The simulation began in darkness. Ashura opened his eyes to the smell of salt and blood. He was lying in a gutter on a street he didn't recognize, narrow, crooked, lined with buildings that leaned toward each other as if they were conspiring. The sky above was gray, choked with smoke from 100 chimneys. He sat up slowly. His body was the same as it had been at the start of Simulation 3, average, untrained, no conditioning. The system reset his physical state at the beginning of every simulation, which meant he had to rebuild his body each time. But his mind carried everything. He stood and began walking. The city was massive, far larger than Rind Island. Ashura recognized the architecture after an hour of observation. The high walls, the constant presence of armed guards in black uniforms, the way ordinary citizens averted their eyes when they passed certain buildings. This was a world government island, one of the inner hubs where Cypher-Paul operated openly. He spent his first month in the simulation learning the terrain. He worked odd jobs, slept in flophouses, and listened. The underworld of the world government was a labyrinth of competing interests, information brokers, weapon smugglers, and the quiet, terrifying presence of the Cypher-Paul agents who enforced the government's will with steel and silence. To get what he needed, Ashura realized, he couldn't approach from the outside. He had to become part of the machinery. He forged a set of papers, a skill he had picked up in his years as a marine clerk, and presented himself at a hiring hall that supplied labor to the government facilities. Within a week, he was a janitor in the administrative wing of the local Cypher-Paul headquarters. It was the most dangerous thing he had ever done. Every day he walked past agents who could kill him with their bare hands. Every night he swept floors and emptied trash cans, his eyes and ears open, his face perfectly blank. He learned the rhythms of the building, the schedules of the guards, the location of the training rooms, the archives, and, most importantly, the restricted library where the manuals for the advanced Rokushiki techniques were kept. It took him 2 years to find a way in. The opportunity came during a fire alarm, a small electrical fire in the kitchen that Ashura had, in fact, started himself. In the chaos of the evacuation, he slipped away from the janitorial staff and made his way to the restricted floor. He had 30 minutes before the building would be cleared and the alarms reset. He worked fast. The library was locked, but the lock was mechanical, and Ashura had picked 100 like it in his previous simulations. Inside, he found what he was looking for, a shelf of manuals detailing the full 6 powers. He didn't have time to read them all, so he did something better. He photographed them. Not with a camera, with his mind. The system didn't give him a photographic memory by default, but after 3 simulations and nearly 40 years of accumulated mental discipline, he had trained himself to remember anything he saw with perfect clarity. He flipped through the manuals page by page, imprinting every diagram, every description, every footnoted warning into his memory. 28 minutes later, he was back in the janitor's closet, mop in hand, as if nothing had happened. He spent the next 5 years of the simulation training in secret, using the knowledge he had stolen. The techniques were far more demanding than Saru and Tekai. Jeppo required the user to kick off the air itself, creating a temporary platform with pure kinetic force. Rankiaku demanded a level of leg strength and control that bordered on superhuman. He made progress, but he pushed too hard. Chapter 14, Pure Efficiency. Ashura minimized social interaction in Simulation 4. Every day was a mathematical calculation. Wake at 4 a.m. Train Jeppo for 3 hours on the rooftop of his rented room, leaping from wall to wall, trying to find the precise angle and force that would let him push against the air itself. Work his janitorial shift from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., using the time to observe and plan. Train Rankiaku from 6 p.m. to midnight, kicking at wooden posts until his shins bled. He ate the same bland food every day. He spoke to no one unless necessary. He slept exactly 4 hours per night. His body adapted, then plateaued, then adapted again. By the end of the 3rd year, he could perform a crude version of Jeppo, 3, maybe 4 steps in the air before gravity pulled him down. His Rankiaku could split a wooden target from 20 feet away. But he wanted more. He wanted the Rokuogen, the ultimate technique, the secret final power that only the most elite Cypher Paul agents could use. The manuals had warned against attempting it without decades of preparation. The force required would tear apart the user's own body if they weren't strong enough. Ashura had read the warnings. He had memorized them. He ignored them. Chapter 15, The Limits of Flesh. On the 6th year of Simulation 4, Ashura attempted the Rokuogen. He had found a secluded spot outside the city, a cliff overlooking the ocean, far from any witnesses. He stood at the edge, his body pushed to its absolute limit, muscles screaming, bones aching from years of overtraining. He focused his energy. The manuals described the Rokuogen as a shockwave attack, created by clapping the hands together with such force that the air itself became a weapon. But that was a simplification. The true technique required the user to compress their own life force, their very will, into a single point and then release it in an instant. Ashura brought his hands together. Crack! The sound was wrong. It wasn't the thunderous clap he had expected. It was the sound of something breaking inside him. Pain exploded through his chest, not the sharp pain of a broken bone, but a deep, spreading pain that felt like his muscles were tearing themselves apart from the inside. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling violently. His forearms were swelling, the skin turning purple. Muscle necrosis, he realized. The manuals were right. He collapsed to his knees. The pain was immense, but he forced himself to observe it, to catalog it, to understand exactly what had gone wrong. His body was breaking down because his physical conditioning wasn't sufficient to channel the force of the technique. His muscles lacked the density. His bones lacked the reinforcement. His nervous system lacked the fine control. He died 3 hours later, alone on the cliff, as his organs failed one by one. Simulation 4 concluded. Duration, 6 years, 2 months, 8 days. Cause of death, systemic organ failure, muscle necrosis cascade. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. When Ashura opened his eyes in the real world, he was in his cabin on the Gray Ghost. The lantern was still burning, the sea was still calm. But in his mind, he now carried complete knowledge of the Rokuogen's requirements, and a detailed understanding of exactly how far he was from meeting them. Good data, he thought. Now I know what to build toward. Chapter 16. Loop 5, The Bounty Hunter Strategy. He didn't return to the Marines in Simulation 5. The Marines had given him what they could. The Cypher Paul manuals had given him the rest. What he needed now was not technique, it was application. He needed to fight, to bleed, to push his body to its limits over and over again until the techniques became instinct. He set his spawn point for the Bounty Hunters Guild headquarters in Logtown, and began a 20-year simulation as an independent hunter. The East Blue was full of minor pirates, men and women with bounties ranging from 1 million to 10 million berry. They were dangerous enough to test him, but not so dangerous that he would die instantly. He worked his way up the ladder, starting with the lowest bounties and moving higher as his skills improved. Each fight was a lesson, each wound was a data point. He learned to read his opponents in the space between heartbeats. He learned to conserve energy, to strike only when the strike would land, to move in ways that minimized his own exposure. His sorrow became faster, his Tekai denser. By year 5, he had added Jeppo and Rankiaku to his arsenal, using the stolen Cypher Paul knowledge to accelerate his training. By year 10, he had mastered all 6 basic forms of Rokushiki. He could walk on air. He could kick blades of wind across a room. He could harden his body to the point where swords shattered against his skin. He could move so fast that unenhanced eyes couldn't track him. But he hadn't yet learned to combine them in combat. That was the next step. Chapter 17, Perfecting Rokushiki. Year 12 of Simulation 5 brought him to a turning point. He was hunting a pirate crew called the Red Sails, 5 million berry each for the captain and his 2 lieutenants. They had taken over a small island in the southern East Blue and were holding the villagers hostage. Ashura arrived alone. The battle lasted 17 minutes. He moved through the pirate stronghold like a ghost, using sorrow to appear and vanish, Jeppo to attack from angles that shouldn't have been possible, Rankiaku to cut down groups of enemies before they could even scream. The captain was the only one who lasted more than a few seconds. He was a former Marine turned rogue, and he knew the six powers by reputation. When Ashura appeared in front of him, the captain didn't panic. He raised his sword and waited. "You're good," the captain said, "but you're still human. The six powers are meant to be used one at a time. You can't use two at once." Ashura smiled. "Saru." He appeared behind the captain. But as he moved, he also activated Tekai, hardening his body for the brief instant of transit. The captain spun, his sword cutting through the air where Ashura had been, but Ashura was already gone again, this time using Jeppo to launch himself upward. From above, he kicked downward. Rankiaku Gale. The blade of compressed air sliced through the captain's sword and continued into his chest. The man fell without a sound. Ashura landed softly on the blood-soaked ground. 3 techniques in less than a second, he thought, not simultaneous. Sequential, but so fast they feel simultaneous. That's the key. He spent the remaining 8 years of the simulation refining that insight. He practiced transitions, Saru into Tekai, into Jeppo, into Rankiaku, until the boundaries between techniques blurred. By the time he allowed himself to be killed in a final, deliberately losing battle against a vice admiral who had come to investigate the bounty hunter rumors, he had fully integrated all 6 Rokushiki into a seamless combat style. He died satisfied. Simulation 5 concluded. Duration, 20 years, 3 months, 11 days. Cause of death, combat vice admiral intervention. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. Chapter 18, Loop 6, the Shipwright Knowledge. Back in reality, Ashura spent the 10-second cooldown reviewing what he had gained. The 6 powers were now second nature. His body, even the real-world version, would integrate the conditioning within seconds of his return. But power without mobility was useless. He needed a vessel that could survive the Grand Line, and the Gray Ghost was not that vessel. It was a smuggler's cutter, fast but fragile. He needed something better, and to build something better, he needed knowledge he didn't have. System Initiate Simulation 6. Parameters Water 7. I need to learn shipwright skills from the ground up, not just how to build, but how to destroy. I need to know the structural weaknesses of every major vessel type in this world. Parameters accepted. Beginning Simulation 6. He spawned in Water 7 as a nameless orphan, just another hungry face in the city of shipwrights. He found work as an apprentice at a small, struggling shipyard that built fishing boats and coastal freighters. The pay was terrible. The work was brutal. But the head shipwright, an old man named Gallows who had lost his left hand to a rigging accident years ago, knew his craft. Ashura stayed for 12 years. He learned to read wood the way a doctor reads a patient. Every grain, every knot, every hidden weakness. He learned to shape planks with hand tools, to drive rivets with a hammer, to design hulls that could shed water like a duck's back. He learned the difference between a ship built for speed and a ship built for war. But he also learned the other side. He learned how to break. Gallows had been a Marine shipwright in his youth, and he knew the standard designs of every major class of vessel. The patrol cutters, the frigates, the battleships. He taught Ashura where to cut to make a hull fail, where to place a charge to bring down a mast, how to sabotage a rudder so it would seem like an accident. Ashura absorbed it all. When Gallows died of a heart attack in the 14th year of the simulation, Ashura took over the shipyard. He ran it for another 6 years, building a reputation for quality and precision. Then, on the 20th year, he walked into the main office of the Galila Company and picked a fight with their best shipwright. It was a test. He wanted to see how far he had come. He lost. The Galila master, a burly man named Peeply Lulu, broke his ribs and his jaw in a brawl that lasted less than a minute. But as Ashura lay bleeding on the floor, he smiled. Because he had learned something. Lulu's fighting style was based on his shipwright's strength, the same muscles and movements used to haul timber and swing mallets. That meant there was a connection between shipbuilding and combat that Ashura hadn't fully explored. Next time, he thought as consciousness faded, I'll come back for that. Simulation 6 concluded. Duration, 20 years, 0 months, 0 days. Cause of death, combat trauma. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. Chapter 19, The Execution. When Ashura returned to reality, he immediately began refitting the Grey Ghost. Using his shipwright knowledge, he identified every structural weakness in the cutter: the thin hull plating amidships, the undersized kelson, the poorly secured mast step. He corrected them all, working alone in the hidden cove he had purchased, using materials diverted from the 77th Branch's supply lines. He also added features that no ordinary shipwright would know: hidden compartments that could only be opened by applying pressure to specific points in a specific sequence, a false rudder that could be deployed if the main rudder was damaged, a reinforced bow that could ram through smaller vessels without compromising the hull's integrity. It took him 3 weeks of real-world time. No simulations. This was physical labor, and the system couldn't do it for him. But when he was done, the Grey Ghost was no longer a smuggler's cutter. It was a weapon. Chapter 20, Real-World Application. With the ship ready, Ashura turned his attention to the Grand Line. He had the skills, he had the ship. He had a network of resources funneling through the 77th Branch. What he didn't have was a crew, not a real one. Largo and his 20 men were adequate for the East Blue, but the Grand Line would eat them alive. He needed people who could fight, people who could survive the impossible weather, the Sea Kings, the pirates who had bounties in the hundreds of millions. He couldn't recruit them yet. He wasn't strong enough to command their loyalty, so he would go alone. "Largo," he said, standing on the dock beside the Grey Ghost, "you're in charge of the Rind Island operation while I'm gone. Keep the supply lines running, don't draw attention, and if anyone asks where I am." "You're on a sabbatical," Largo said, "studying navigation in the South Blue." Ashura nodded. Good man. He boarded the Grey Ghost alone, cast off the lines, and sailed east. Chapter 21, Leaving the East Blue. The journey to Reverse Mountain took 3 weeks of real-world sailing. Ashura used the time to train, running through his Rokushiki forms on the deck for hours each day, pushing his body to maintain the conditioning he had built in the simulations. He crossed the calm belt at night, using a small wind-powered paddle system he had designed to move the ship through the dead air. No Sea Kings attacked. He was too small to be worth their notice. And then he was there. Reverse Mountain rose out of the sea like a wall of stone, its peak hidden in the clouds, its base churning with white water. The entrance to the Grand Line was a crack in the mountain's face, a narrow channel that shot upward at an impossible angle, driven by the force of the currents. Ashura had simulated this crossing dozens of times. He knew exactly where to position the ship, exactly when to cut the sails, exactly how to ride the current without being smashed against the rocks. He did it perfectly. The Grey Ghost shot up the mountain like a stone from a sling, hung for a moment at the summit, and then plunged down the other side into a sky that was suddenly, impossibly blue. He was in the Grand Line. Chapter 22, Entering the Grand Line. The weather in the Grand Line was insane. Ashura had read about it. He had watched it in the anime, but experiencing it was different. One moment the sun was blazing down, hot enough to blister skin. The next, hail was falling, stones of ice the size of his fist hammering the deck of the Grey Ghost. Then the wind shifted, the temperature dropped, and snow began to fall. He weathered it all. His shipwright modifications kept the hull intact. His Rokushiki training kept him from being knocked overboard by the sudden squalls. And his observation haki, still rudimentary, still unrefined, gave him just enough warning to brace before the worst impacts. He sailed for 3 days without seeing land. On the 4th day, he saw something else. A ship. It was a large vessel, easily 4 times the size of the Grey Ghost. Its hull was painted black, and its sails bore a symbol Ashura recognized: a skull with 3 crossbones surrounded by flames. A pirate flag. Not one he knew from canon, which meant it was either a minor crew or one that would be wiped out before the story began. He could have avoided them. He could have turned south, used his speed to outrun them, disappeared into the endless blue. Instead, he sailed toward them. I need combat data, he thought, and I need to know what the Grand Line considers dangerous. The pirates spotted him within minutes. They laughed at the small ship approaching them, at the single figure standing on its deck. Ashura waited until they were close enough to see his face. Then he moved. "Saru." He crossed the distance between the ships in less than a second, landing on their deck before anyone could react. The pirates froze, staring at him. "Good evening," Ashura said. "I have a few questions." The battle lasted 90 seconds. When it was over, 17 pirates were unconscious on the deck, and their captain, a fat man with a 50 million berry bounty, was on his knees begging. Ashura asked his questions. He learned about the local powers, the weather patterns, the islands within a week's sail. Then he knocked the captain unconscious, looted the ship's supplies for anything useful, and returned to the Gray Ghost. 50 million berry, he thought as he sailed away. That's the baseline for the weak ones in paradise. I have a long way to go. Phase 3, the Haki Awakening Loops. Chapter 23, Loop 7, the Skypia Expedition. That night, anchored behind a small, uninhabited island, Ashura initiated the next simulation. He needed Haki. The 6 powers were powerful, but they were only the foundation. In the New World, everyone who mattered had Haki, the ability to sense, to harden, to dominate. Without it, he would never survive. The system had told him that mantra, the observation technique used by the priests of Skypia, was a form of observation Haki. If he could learn that, he would have a starting point. System, initiate simulation 7. Parameters, Skypia, spawn me in the White Sea as a traveler seeking enlightenment. I need to learn mantra from the ground up. Parameters accepted, beginning simulation 7. He spawned in a small cloud village on the edge of the White Sea, a place called Wethuria, not the Wethuria of the New World, but a minor settlement of Sky Islanders who traded in wind and cloud. He presented himself as a scholar from the Blue Seas come to study their ways. They were suspicious at first, but Ashura had spent decades learning how to earn trust. He worked, he helped, he listened. It took him 2 years to find a teacher. Chapter 24, Cracking Observation Haki. The teacher was an old woman named Marin. She had been a priestess in her youth, before the priests of Enel had taken over Upper Yard. She had fled to Wethuria to escape the killing. "You want to learn mantra?" she said, her voice crackling like dry leaves. "Why?" "To survive," Ashura said. "Good answer. The wrong answer would have been to hurt people." She handed him a blindfold. "Put this on. You will wear it for the next 15 years. You will learn to see without your eyes, or you will die." He put on the blindfold. The first year was torture. He stumbled through the cloud streets, bumping into walls, falling off ledges, burning himself on cooking fires. His other senses sharpened. He could hear a whisper from across a room, smell rain coming from 3 miles away, but that wasn't mantra. That was just human adaptation. The second year, something shifted. He was walking through the village when he felt a presence behind him. Not a sound, not a smell, but a presence. A sense of intention. He turned and found a child staring at him, about to throw a snowball. He had felt the child's intent before the child had even raised his arm. That's it, he realized. That's the edge. He spent the next 13 years refining that sense. He learned to extend it outward, to feel the presence of everyone within a certain radius. He learned to differentiate between intentions, hostility, curiosity, fear, hunger. He learned to feel the shape of a room without entering it, to sense the movement of fish below the surface of the White Sea, to track flying birds by the pressure of their passage through the air. By the 15th year, his observation Haki was functional enough to be useful. But he needed to test it against something dangerous. Chapter 25, Death by Lightning. He traveled to Upper Yard, the domain of God Enel. The priests who guarded the path to Enel's temple were powerful, far more powerful than anything Ashura had faced in the East Blue. But his observation Haki gave him an advantage. He could sense their attacks before they launched them, could move out of the way before the blows landed. He fought his way past 3 priests and reached the temple itself. And there stood Enel. The so-called god was lounging on a throne of gold, his drum attached to his back, his eyes half closed. He looked at Ashura with mild curiosity. "A Blue Sea dweller," Enel said. "How interesting, you have mantra, not as refined as mine, but you have it." Ashura didn't speak. He was already moving. "Saru." He appeared in front of Enel, his fist coated in the full force of his Rokushiki training. The punch would have shattered a battleship's hull. Enel vanished into golden light and reappeared 10 feet away, untouched. Fast, Enel said, but speed means nothing when I can turn into lightning. Did you think I wouldn't notice you approaching? I felt your intent from the moment you stepped onto Upper Yard. He raised his hand. Elthor. Lightning struck from the sky. Ashura's observation Haki screamed a warning, but it was too late. The lightning moved at the speed of light. His body hadn't even begun to dodge before the electricity hit him. The pain lasted less than a second, then there was nothing. Simulation 7 concluded. Duration, 17 years, 4 months, 2 days. Cause of death, massive electrical trauma. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. Ashura opened his eyes in the cabin of the Gray Ghost. His observation Haki was fully integrated. He could feel the sea around him, the fish swimming beneath the hull, the birds sleeping on the nearby island, the distant presence of a merchant ship 3 miles to the north. He had what he came for. Chapter 26, Real-World Awakening. The next morning, Ashura tested his new abilities. He stood on the deck of the Gray Ghost and closed his eyes. He extended his observation Haki outward, feeling the shape of the sea around him. He could sense the currents, the presence of sea kings in the deep water, the subtle shifts in air pressure that preceded a storm. He could also sense people. There was a fishing village on the island behind him, about 50 people going about their morning routines. He could feel their intentions, their emotions, their relative positions. Not perfectly, not like Enel, but well enough to know that none of them were a threat. He opened his eyes. I need more, he thought. Observation is one thing, but armament is what lets you hit the untouchable. System Initiate Simulation 8. Chapter 27, Loop 8, The New World Gladiator. Parameters, Dressrosa. Spawn me in the Colosseum years before Doflamingo's takeover. I need to learn armament Haki through combat pressure. Parameters accepted, beginning Simulation 8. He spawned in the slave quarters of the Colosseum. Not as a gladiator, as a slave. The shock of it was visceral, the collar around his neck, the chains on his wrists, the stench of fear and blood and unwashed bodies. He had lived through 40 years of simulations, had died multiple deaths, but he had never been a slave. Adapt, he told himself. Survive, learn. He bided his time. He learned the rhythms of the Colosseum, the fights, the gambling, the corrupt officials who ran the place. He learned which gladiators were dangerous and which were just desperate, and he learned about Haki. Armament Haki was spoken of in whispers. It was the secret of the strong, the invisible armor that could turn a body into a weapon. Some of the veteran gladiators had it. They were the ones who never lost. Ashura wanted it. His chance came after 6 months. A riot broke out during a poorly managed fight, a slave rebellion that was quickly crushed but created enough chaos for Ashura to break his chains and escape the slave quarters. He didn't leave the Colosseum, he went deeper. Chapter 28, The Refusal to Repeat. He found the underground training floors where the veteran gladiators prepared for their matches. It was a brutal place. No rules, no mercy, just constant combat against opponents who wanted to kill him. Ashura thrived. His Rokushiki gave him a foundation that most gladiators lacked. His observation Haki warned him of incoming attacks. But armament Haki required something different, not skill, not speed, but will. The willingness to stand your ground and take a hit. He trained for 3 years underground, fighting every day, losing as often as he won. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to feel something new, a layer of hardness beneath his skin, a sense that he could reinforce his body with something more than muscle. The Colosseum officials noticed him. They offered him a permanent position, a contract, good pay, a chance to become a champion. Ashura refused. A permanent position means no more growth, he told the offerer. It means fighting the same opponents, using the same techniques, never being challenged. I didn't come here to be comfortable. He broke out of the Colosseum that night, using his newfound armament Haki to shatter the locks on the gates. Chapter 29, Hardening the Soul. He spent the next 10 years of Simulation 8 wandering the new world, seeking out rogue warriors who could test his armament Haki. He fought in back alley death matches. He challenged retired pirates in their mountain fortresses. He hunted down rumors of Haki users and demanded they teach him, by force if necessary. His armament Haki grew. The invisible armor became visible, a faint black sheen that covered his fists when he concentrated. Not the deep, permanent black of a master, but enough to make a difference. Enough to block a sword with his bare arm, enough to punch through a stone wall. He refined the technique. He learned to spread the Haki across his entire body, to focus it in a single point for maximum impact. He learned to maintain it while moving, while using sorrow, while attacking from awkward angles. By the 10th year, his armament Haki had reached a plateau. He wasn't getting stronger. He needed a new challenge. Chapter 30, Loop End. He found it in the form of a Don Quixote family executive, a man named Dellinger, who had been sent to collect tribute from a small island that Ashura happened to be passing through. Dellinger was fast, faster than anyone Ashura had fought in this simulation. His fighting style was savage, almost animalistic, and his armament Haki was stronger than Ashura's. They fought for 3 minutes. Ashura landed several hits, enough to make Dellinger bleed, enough to make him angry. But Dellinger landed more. And when Dellinger finally kicked Ashura through a building and into the sea, Ashura knew he was done. His armament Haki had been enough to survive the fight. It had not been enough to win. That's fine, he thought as the water filled his lungs. I don't need to win, I just need to record. Simulation 8 concluded. Duration, 13 years, 7 months, 3 days. Cause of death, drowning post-combat trauma. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. Chapter 31, The Dual Integration. Back in reality, Ashura tested his armament Haki against a Sea King. The creature surfaced near the gray ghost, a massive serpent with scales the color of rust and eyes the size of dinner plates. It was small by Grand Line standards, maybe 60 feet long, but it was still a Sea King. Ashura didn't run. He jumped onto its head, his feet coated in black Haki, and punched downward with all the force of his Rokushiki-enhanced strength. Crack! The Sea King's skull shattered. The creature went limp and sank beneath the waves. Ashura landed back on the deck of the gray ghost, his fist smoking from the impact. He looked at his hand. The black sheen of armament Haki was still visible, fading slowly back into his skin. Observation and armament, he thought. I have both now. But there's one more. Chapter 32, Loop 9, The Failed King. System, Initiate Simulation 9. Parameters, the new world. I need to unlock Conqueror's Haki. Put me in situations that test the limits of my will. Parameters accepted, beginning Simulation 9. He spawned on an island known for producing pirate captains, men and women with the charisma to lead, the will to dominate, the innate force that made others kneel. Ashura spent the first year building a reputation. He challenged the local warlord, defeated him in single combat, and took control of his territory. He gathered followers, not because he wanted them, but because a king needed subjects to dominate. He felt for the pressure behind his eyes. The static in his skull that the system had told him was the precursor to Conqueror's Haki. Nothing. He tried again. He put himself in life-or-death situations, fighting rearguard actions against superior forces, refusing to back down even when outnumbered 50-1. He screamed his will at the world, demanded that reality bend to his presence. Nothing. Years passed, he fought, he bled, he killed, he commanded. He stood on the deck of his ship as storms raged around him and refused to flinch. Nothing. By the 10th year, he had accepted that something was wrong. The pressure was there. He could feel it building behind his eyes, a tension that never released. But the release never came. His will was immense, but it was calculated, not the overflowing, innate dominance of a born king. He spent 30 more years trying to force it. He sought out masters of Conqueror's Haki, Shanks, Rayleigh, even Big Mom, and studied them from a distance. He read everything he could find. He meditated for months at a time, searching for the spark. Nothing. On his 40th year in the simulation, old and tired, Ashura sat on a cliff overlooking the sea and accepted the truth. Conqueror's Haki is not a skill. It cannot be trained, simulated, or forced. It is either present at the core of a person's being or it is not. The system can give me everything except that which requires something I do not have, the blood of a king. The unshakable belief that I was born to stand above others, not because I earned it, but because I am. He had earned everything he had. He had died dozens of times, had lived centuries in simulations, had clawed his way to power through sheer determination. But that was the difference. He was a self-made man, and Conqueror's haki required something innate. He died of old age at 82, never having unlocked the power. Simulation 9 concluded. Duration, 40 years, 1 month, 6 days. Cause of death, natural causes, old age. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. When Ashura opened his eyes in reality, he felt no different. The system had nothing to integrate, because he had learned nothing about Conqueror's haki except that he would never have it. He sat in the dark for a long time. So that's my ceiling, he thought. No king's blood, no innate dominance. Fine, I don't need to dominate, I just need to win. He stood up and walked back to the deck of the Gray Ghost. Chapter 33, Loop 10, The Devil Fruit Analysis. He pushed the failure aside. There was still work to do. System, Initiate Simulation 10. Parameters, the underworld of the Grand Line. I need to study devil fruits, how they work, how they affect the lineage factor, and how to counter them. Parameters accepted, beginning Simulation 10. He spawned as a researcher's assistant in a black market laboratory, where scientists studied devil fruits for the world government's intelligence agencies. It was grim work. Live dissections, forced feedings, the study of how the fruits changed a person's body at the cellular level. Ashura took notes, hundreds of pages of notes recorded in his perfect memory. He learned that devil fruits worked by altering the lineage factor, the genetic code that defined a person's physical form. The alteration was permanent and transmissible to the user's descendants. No, not transmissible. The lineage factor reverted after death. He learned that each fruit had a unique signature, a pattern that could be identified if you knew what to look for. This was how the world government tracked the fruits across the world. And he learned the weaknesses. Every devil fruit had a vulnerability, not just the obvious ones, water, sea stone, haki, but specific exploitable weaknesses based on the fruit's nature. Paramecia fruits tended to have limits on their area of effect. Zoan fruits had transformation windows that could be predicted. Logia fruits required haki to touch, but even they had elemental counters. He spent 15 years in that laboratory, learning everything he could. Then he faked his death and escaped into the underworld, using his knowledge to hunt down devil fruit users and test his theories. He killed 32 ability users in the next 20 years. Each death taught him something new. By the time he finally died, betrayed by a colleague who wanted his research, he had compiled a mental encyclopedia of counters for over 50 known devil fruits. Simulation 10 concluded. Duration, 35 years, 2 months, 8 days. Cause of death, poison, betrayal. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. Chapter 34, Anti-Ability User Tactics. Back in reality, Ashura began practicing what he had learned. The Gray Ghost was passing through a stretch of the Grand Line known for its high concentration of devil fruit users, petty warlords who had eaten whatever fruits they could find, and now terrorized the local islands. Ashura hunted them. He didn't need to fight them head-on. He knew their weaknesses. One user had a fruit that let him control sand. Ashura flooded his hideout with water before the battle even began. Another user had a fruit that let him stretch like rubber. Ashura used his Rankyaku to cut from a distance, never letting the man get close. He killed 7 ability users in 3 weeks. His reputation began to spread. The locals called him the Ability Hunter, a ghost who appeared from nowhere, killed devil fruit users with impossible precision, and vanished. Ashura didn't care about the reputation. He cared about the data. And the data told him he was ready for the next step. Chapter 35, The Paradise Chokepoint. He reached the end of Paradise, the stretch of the Grand Line that led to the Red Line and the entrance to the New World. The Sabyati archipelago was visible on the horizon, its giant mangrove trees rising from the sea like grasping fingers. Ashura anchored the gray ghost behind a small, uninhabited island and prepared for what came next. The new world was different. The pirates there had bounties in the hundreds of millions. The Yonko ruled with absolute authority. The weather was a weapon in itself. He needed more. System, Initiate Simulation 11. Parameters, Wano. I need to learn Ryuo, the advanced application of armament haki that lets the user project their will outward. Parameters accepted. Beginning Simulation 11. Phase 4, Peak Optimization and Advanced Techniques. Chapter 36, Loop 11, the Wano Border Break. He spawned on the shores of Wano, an isolated country, closed off from the world, ruled by the tyrannical Shogun Orochi and the pirate Kaido. He had to enter illegally. Wano's borders were guarded by powerful samurai and the beast pirates' patrols. Ashura used his Rokushiki to cross the waterfalls that surrounded the country, moving at night, avoiding detection. He made landfall in the Kuri region, a lawless area where the weak were prey. He found work as a laborer in a small mining village, hiding his true strength while he learned the lay of the land. The people of Wano spoke of Ryuo, the flowing power that allowed a warrior to project their haki beyond their body. It was the secret of the samurai, the technique that let them cut steel and deflect bullets. Ashura wanted it. Chapter 37, Flowing Power. He found a teacher in the Kuri region, an old samurai named Yasu, who had been a retainer of the Kazuki family before Orochi's purge. Yasu was broken in body but not in spirit, and he saw something in Ashura that reminded him of the samurai of old. "You have haki," Yasu said, "but you use it like a club, heavy, blunt. You need to use it like a blade, thin, sharp, flowing." He taught Ashura to meditate, to breathe, to feel the haki not as an armor around his body, but as a current flowing through him, from his core, out through his limbs, into the world. It took him 3 years to understand what Yasu meant. It took him 10 years to do it reliably. But by the 15th year of the simulation, Ashura could project his armament haki beyond his body. He could cut a tree from 10 feet away. He could block a sword without touching it. He could feel his haki flowing through the air like water. Yasu nodded when he saw it. "You are ready for the next step." Chapter 38, The Internal Destruction. The next step was internal destruction. Yasu taught him to push his haki into his target, not just to cover his fists, but to inject his will into the object he was striking. The result was devastating. A punch that looked normal on the outside would shatter the target from within, leaving the exterior intact. Ashura practiced on rocks, on trees, on the armored shells of the giant beetles that lived in the Wano forests. Each strike was a lesson. Each failure taught him something about the flow of haki. It took him another 15 years to master the technique. By the end of the 30th year in Wano, Ashura could destroy a boulder from the inside out with a single touch. He could shatter a man's organs without breaking his skin. He could cut through steel as if it were paper. Yasu died of old age in the 32nd year. Ashura buried him on a hill overlooking the sea and left Wano the same way he had entered, alone, in the dark, carrying everything he had learned. He died in the 35th year of the simulation, killed by a beast pirate patrol that caught him on the border. But he had already learned what he came for. Simulation 11 concluded. Duration, 35 years, 0 months, 0 days. Cause of death, combat beast pirates. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. Chapter 39, Loop 12, The Mind Fortress. Back in reality, Ashura considered his mental state. The system removed trauma, but it didn't remove the capacity for trauma. His mind was still vulnerable to certain attacks. Mental manipulation, psychological warfare, the crushing pressure of a conqueror's haki user's will. He needed to harden his mind. System, Initiate Simulation 12. Parameters, a desolate winter island. I need to meditate. I need to build a fortress in my mind that nothing can breach. Parameters accepted. Beginning Simulation 12. He spawned on a frozen wasteland. No name, no people, just ice and snow and the endless howling of the wind. He built a small shelter from driftwood and seal skins, and he began to meditate. The first decade was the hardest. His mind rebelled against the silence. He had spent centuries in simulations, always moving, always learning, always doing. Sitting still felt like death. But he forced himself. He learned to quiet his thoughts, to observe his own mind as if from a distance, to recognize his fears, his desires, his attachments, and to let them go. By the 20th year, he had achieved something close to peace. By the 50th year, he had built a fortress in his mind, a mental construct that represented his will. It had walls of diamond, gates of sea stone, and a keep at its center where his core self resided. Nothing could enter without his permission. By the 80th year, he was ready. He died of old age, lying on a bed of furs, looking up at the aurora that danced across the winter sky. His last thought was not of regret, but of satisfaction. Simulation 12 concluded. Duration, 80 years, 0 months, 0 days. Cause of death, natural causes, old age. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. Chapter 40, The Unshakable Mind. When Ashura opened his eyes in reality, his presence had changed. The system had integrated his 80 years of meditation into his real-world mind. His thoughts were clearer. His emotions were controlled. His will was a fortress that no external force could shake. He stood on the deck of the Gray Ghost and looked toward Sabyati. A Marine officer was passing by on a patrol boat, and the man glanced at Ashura, then looked away as if he had seen something unsettling. Ashura smiled. That's the effect, he thought. I'm unreadable. My presence doesn't register as a threat or an ally. I'm just a gap in perception. He was ready for the new world. Chapter 41, Real-World Metamorphosis. But before he entered the new world, he ran one more short simulation. System, Initiate Simulation 13, Short Duration. I need to test different training regimes and stat allocations to maximize efficiency. Parameters, a controlled environment. Let me run multiple short loops, each lasting 1 to 2 years, to optimize my physical training. Parameters accepted. He ran 7 short simulations, each one designed to test a different approach to physical conditioning. High weight, low repetition. Low weight, high repetition. Extreme endurance training. Sprint training, combined arms training. Each simulation lasted 2 years. Each one ended with him dying of overwork or injury, and each one taught him something. By the end of the 7th short simulation, he had perfected his training regimen. He knew exactly how much to push his body, exactly when to rest, exactly what to eat to maximize muscle growth and hacky development. Simulation 13 concluded, 7 sub-loops, total duration 14 years. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. He opened his eyes in reality. 10 seconds had passed. He was ready. Chapter 42, Loop 14, The Giant's Might. One more technique before the new world. System, Initiate Simulation 14. Parameters, LBAF. I need to understand giant-scale kinetic force, the mechanics behind their devastating shockwave attacks. Parameters accepted, beginning Simulation 14. He spawned on the shores of Elbaf, the land of giants. He was tiny by their standards, a mouse among elephants, but he had something they respected, strength. He challenged a young giant to a wrestling match on his first day. He lost, of course, but he made the giant work for it. The giants were fascinated by him. They had never seen a human who could move like he could, who could harden his body to withstand their blows, who could dodge with a speed that seemed impossible. They accepted him as a curiosity, then as a student. He spent 20 years on Elbaf learning their techniques. The giants didn't use haki the way humans did. They used raw physical force, amplified by their massive size and muscle density. But the principles were the same. The way they shifted their weight to generate power. The way they used their entire body as a weapon, not just their fists. Ashura adapted their techniques to his human scale. He learned to shift his weight the way a giant did, using his entire body to generate force. He learned to throw punches that used his legs, his hips, his back, not just his arms. He learned to stomp the ground with such force that it created shockwaves. By the 20th year, he had created a new martial arts style, a hybrid of rokushiki and giant kinetics. It was efficient, brutal, and perfectly suited to his body. He died in the 21st year, challenging the giant king to a sparring match. The king didn't mean to kill him. It was an accident, a punch that landed harder than intended. But Ashura died smiling. Simulation 14 concluded. Duration, 21 years, 3 months, 0 days. Cause of death, combat accidental. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. Chapter 43, Combining Styles. Back in reality, Ashura practiced his new style on the deck of the Grey Ghost. The movements felt strange at first. The weight shifts, the full body rotations, the explosive stomps. But his body adapted quickly, integrating the giant kinetic principles into his existing Rokushiki foundation. He punched the air. Boom! A shockwave erupted from his fist, visible as a ripple in the air. It traveled 50 feet before dissipating, leaving a trail of disturbed water on the sea's surface. That's new, he thought. He spent a week refining the technique, combining it with his Saru and Jeppo to create a mobile, devastating combat style. He could now move at impossible speeds, harden his body to near invulnerability, and strike with the force of a giant. He was ready for the new world. Chapter 44, Entering the New World. He sailed through the gates of the Red Line and into the new world. The difference was immediate. The sea itself felt heavier, denser, more oppressive. The sky was a bruised purple, and the wind carried the scent of ozone and blood. He had been sailing for less than an hour when he encountered his first New World pirate. The ship was flying the flag of the Beast Pirates, a massive vessel, easily 10 times the size of the Grey Ghost, bristling with cannons and crewed by hundreds of fighters. At its head stood a man Ashura recognized from his simulations, a headliner named Sheepshead, a sheep-themed gift-gifter with a bounty of 70 million berry. Sheepshead looked down at the small ship approaching him and laughed. "Hey, little guy," he shouted. "You lost. This is Beast Pirate territory. Turn around or I'll feed you to the sharks." Ashura didn't answer. He leaped from the deck of the Grey Ghost, using Jeppo to launch himself upward, Saru to close the distance, and armament Haki to harden his fist. He landed on the deck of the Beast Pirate ship, directly in front of Sheepshead. "Good evening," Ashura said. "I have a few questions." Sheepshead's eyes widened. He reached for his weapon. Ashura punched him in the chest. The blow was enhanced by Ryuo, the internal destruction technique he had learned in Wano. From the outside, Sheepshead looked unharmed, but inside his heart had been pulverized. The headliner collapsed without a sound. The rest of the Beast Pirates stared in shock. Then they charged. Ashura moved through them like a ghost. Saru to appear, Tekai to block, Rankyaku to cut, Jeppo to evade. He didn't kill them all. Knocking them unconscious was faster, but he left a trail of broken bodies behind him. 90 seconds later, the ship was his. He gathered the surviving pirates on the deck and asked his questions. Where was Kaido? What were the Beast Pirates' current movements? Where were the safe harbors, the dangerous zones, the territories controlled by the other Yonko? The pirates answered. They were terrified. When he had all the information he needed, Ashura bound the pirates to their masts, set their ship adrift, and returned to the Grey Ghost. The new world, he thought. Let's begin. Chapter 45, Eliminating the Bottlenecks. He sailed for a month, avoiding major confrontations, gathering intelligence. The Beast Pirates were in turmoil after the death of one of their headliners. They didn't know who had killed him, only that he was dead and his crew had been humiliated. Ashura used the chaos to his advantage. He struck at supply depots, ambushed patrols, and stole valuable resources from under their noses. Each raid was precise, efficient, and left no witnesses. He also identified his own bottlenecks. His physical conditioning was near its peak, but his Haki could still improve. His observation Haki was good, but not great. He couldn't predict the future like Katakuri. His armament Haki was strong, but not unbreakable. He ran a series of short simulations, each one lasting a few years, to test different methods of pushing past these plateaus. He tried extreme sensory deprivation to sharpen his observation. It worked, but not enough. He tried fighting against multiple armament masters simultaneously to force his own Haki to adapt. It worked, but slowly. He accepted that his Haki would never reach the level of the Yonko. Not because he lacked talent, but because he lacked time. Real time, not simulated time. The simulations gave him centuries of experience, but Haki was tied to the body, and the body could only grow so much in the real world. I'll never be the strongest, he thought, but I don't need to be, I just need to be smartest. He stopped trying to brute force his Haki and focused on what he did best, planning. Phase 5, the Shadow Sovereign of the New World. Chapter 46, The Invisible Hand. Ashura did not join the Yonko, he did not join the Marines, he did not try to become Pirate King. Instead, he became the Invisible Hand. He used his accumulated knowledge to systematically intercept high-value resources before anyone else could claim them. He knew where the ancient texts were hidden, where the weapons were stored, where the tactical positions were weakest. He stole from Big Mom, he stole from Kaido. He stole from Shanks, though Shanks was the hardest because his crew's observation Haki was so strong that Ashura could barely approach. But he never got caught, he never left a trace. He was a ghost, a rumor, a shadow that moved through the new world taking what it wanted and disappearing. The Yonko noticed eventually. They sent hunters after the mysterious thief. Ashura killed them all. Chapter 47, Loop 15, The Ultimate Combat Simulation. But he knew the Yonko wouldn't ignore him forever. Eventually, they would come for him in force. And when they did, he needed to be ready. System, Initiate Simulation 15. Parameters, Total War. I need to map out the exact responses of every major faction to a new power rising in the new world. I will wage war against all of them simultaneously, the Yonko, the Marines, the world government, and record everything. Parameters accepted, beginning Simulation 15. The simulation was a nightmare. He spawned as a new player in the new world, a captain with no crew, no reputation, no territory. He built his power base from nothing, using everything he had learned across 14 previous simulations. Within 5 years, he had a crew. Within 10, he had territory. Within 20, he was a threat. Then the Yonko noticed him. Big Mom attacked first. She sent a fleet to destroy his island. Ashura repelled it, but barely. His observation Haki saved him from the worst of her homies, and his armament Haki let him survive her initial assault. But he couldn't touch her. Her skin was like iron, even without Haki. Kaido attacked next. The Beast Pirates came with their full force, gifters, headliners, the All-Stars. Ashura fought for 3 days straight, killing hundreds, but in the end, Kaido himself descended from the sky in dragon form and destroyed everything. Ashura died, but he had learned something. He reset the simulation. The system allowed him to start over, using the knowledge from the previous run, and tried again. This time, he avoided confrontation with the Yonko. He focused on undermining them from within, using his knowledge of their weaknesses to create chaos. It worked, but slowly, too slowly. The Marines noticed the power vacuum and moved in, and Ashura found himself fighting a three-front war. He died again. He reset and again and again. Each death taught him something. Each failure gave him data. By his 10th attempt, he had mapped out the strategic flaws of every major faction. By his 20th, he had designed a plan that could succeed. The plan required 20 years of preparation, perfect timing, and a little bit of luck, but it was possible. On his 25th attempt, he executed the plan perfectly. He didn't defeat the Yonko directly. He didn't try. Instead, he manipulated them into fighting each other using stolen resources, false intelligence, and carefully timed provocations. While they were distracted, he seized control of the strategic choke points, the ancient weapons, the secrets that the world government had hidden for centuries. By the time the Yonko realized what had happened, it was too late. Ashura controlled the new world's infrastructure. He didn't need to be the strongest. He just needed to be the most essential. He died of old age at 93. The undisputed power behind the throne of the New World. Simulation 15 concluded. Duration, 93 years aggregate across 25 subloops. Removing negative psychological effects, success. Integrating rewards, success. Chapter 48, The Final Data Integration. Ashura opened his eyes in reality. The 10-second cooldown had just finished. The lantern in his cabin was still burning. The sea was still calm. But in his mind, he carried the blueprint for absolute dominance. He knew exactly which resources to seize first, which factions to provoke, which alliances to forge and which to betray. He knew the weak points in Big Mom's territory, the gaps in Kaido's patrols, the blind spots in the Marines' intelligence network. He knew how to win. Chapter 49, Executing the Plan. He began the next morning. First, he seized a small, uninhabited island in the New World's neutral zone, a place with fresh water, defensible harbors, and hidden caves that could serve as storage. He claimed it as his base. Second, he reached out to the underworld brokers he had identified in his simulations. He used his knowledge to offer them deals they couldn't refuse, information, resources, strategic advantages that no one else could provide. Within a month, he had a network of contacts across the New World. Third, he began his resource acquisition. He stole a shipment of seastone from a marine convoy. He intercepted a tribute payment meant for Big Mom. He hacked into the world government's intelligence network and copied their files on the Yonko. Each operation was flawless. Each one left no trace. The factions of the New World began to notice that something was wrong, resources disappearing, shipments going missing, secrets being leaked, but they couldn't identify the source. Ashura was a ghost. Chapter 50, The Sovereign Ascendant. 2 years of real-world time passed. Ashura sat on a cliff overlooking his island, watching the sun set over the New World. The sea below him was calm. The sky was clear. His observation Haki told him that no one was approaching. His armament Haki was ready. His mind was a fortress. He had done it. He had entered the One Piece world with nothing, 340 berry, a dark jacket, and a system that let him live infinite lives. He had died hundreds of times, lived thousands of years, mastered techniques that most people would never even see. And now he stood at the apex. Not as a pirate king, not as a Yonko, not as a marine admiral. Those titles were for people who needed the world to recognize them. Ashura did not need recognition. He was the Shadow Sovereign, the power behind the throne, the ghost in the machine of the New World. The Yonko still fought each other for control of the seas. The Marines still hunted pirates. The world government still pretended to rule. But every major decision, every shift in power, every secret that changed the balance of the world, all of it passed through him first. He had not conquered the world. He had done something more elegant. He had made himself essential. A ship appeared on the horizon. Ashura's observation Haki identified the crew, a small group of adventurers, nothing special, probably looking for a place to rest. He stood up and walked down the cliff toward the harbor. Let them come, he thought. Let them all come. I've been waiting for them. I've been waiting for centuries. And I'm ready. End of Arc 1.